So I'm going to talk about two separate sections as it relates to saddle fit. The first thing we're going to talk about is actually the excellent thing that we just talked about in the first session this afternoon, which was evaluation and confirmation. Very often, the first thing that's overlooked about saddle fitting is the actual horse, the actual thing we're going to put the saddle on. So there's two things that we need to consider first when we talk about the horse. We need to talk about the wither shape and the back, the angles of the back. And the next thing we have to talk about is the top line balance, which is one of the last things that was talked about in the confirmational talk. And then we're also going to hit on the four major points of saddle fit. There's a lot of different points of saddle fit, but I only chose to talk about these four because they're really the most important. So we're going to talk about the placement of the saddle, the width of the tree, handle contact, and the balance of the saddle. So, kind of back to the talk we just had, is the skeleton of the horse plus the muscle of the horse equals the conformation and the function. So when we're talking about saddle fitting, the conformation of the horse, it deals with mostly the skeleton. In saddle fitting, what covers the skeleton, which is the muscle. The muscle is the condition of the horse. That's in constant flux all the time. And there's a million different reasons why the muscle can change on a horse. And when the muscle changes on a horse, that changes the way the saddle fits. The conformation, the skeleton of the horse, that doesn't change. That's fixed. Once the skeleton stops growing, that's it. That's the conformation of the horse. It's sticky on the top. So the first thing we're going to consider with the horse is, where does the saddle go on the horse's back? So in Mrs. Webb's talk, she was saying how the horse is really not designed to carry weight on its back, and this is very true. So if you look at the actual skeleton of the horse, you'll see that the cervical vertebrae come in, and actually you see this metal piece right here? I don't know if from the other talk. She said that doesn't really where the cervical vertebrae go. They actually go lower in the body. Okay, but because they had to put the skeleton together, they actually went higher up. But the cervical vertebrae actually come down lower and then go into the body. So on the horse's back, where they actually carry a saddle is from behind the shoulder blade, and this shoulder blade is actually too far back because of the way it's positioned. But from behind the shoulder blade to where the last rib comes off of the spine is where we put the saddle on the horse's back. The reason for this is the long muscle that goes on top of the rib cage, it's supported by the ribs. Without the ribs, we couldn't sit on a horse's back. These vertebrae back here, you can't really see them from your angle because they're kind of sticking out flat. These are not strong enough to carry weight. So on my fitting horse over here, you can see from here to behind the shoulder blade, that's where we put the saddle on the horse's back. So you're probably thinking to yourself, well, how do I know I'm placing the saddle correctly on my horse's back? Well, I brought some pieces parts to show you. So this is the inside of your saddle. This specifically is a dressage tree. So this is actually what you sit on when you sit in a saddle. So it's the tree of the saddle that has to be in the proper placement. So I'm going to show you it without the panel and with the panel, because of course we don't see our saddle this way. I see your saddle this way, but you don't. It's fully clothed. It's got all its parts on it. It's got its seat, and the skirts, and the flaps, and the panel, and you don't see this part anymore. So when you put this on the horse's back, the tree point goes behind the horse's shoulder blade. So in this diagram here, you see this green edge here? That's where your tree point goes. So you know where that has to go on the horse, but there's length to the saddle. So you need to make sure that the back part of the tree doesn't go beyond the last rib. So now as we start to add its clothes, Here's the bottom part of the saddle. This is what rests against the horse's back. Now you're going, oh my God, I can't see my tree anymore. You still don't see your saddle this way, but your tree point is in this pocket. So in a dressage saddle, it's pretty easy to make sure that your saddle is behind the shoulder blade because the front of the saddle is very straight. So it's easy to make sure that part is behind the shoulder blade. But as you can see, there's actually a bit of the panel that comes in front of the tree point. All right? This part is still squishy. The tree is not. The tree is inflexible. All right? So if I were to slide this forward, now I've placed my saddle too far forward, and now my tree points are going to restrict the movement of the horse's shoulder blade. So if you turn to the person next to you, somebody turns to somebody else. So one person is facing this way, and the other person is facing you. So you're going to be like this. All right? There you go. All right. Now you're going to take your thumbs and put them on the shoulder blade of the person in front of you. Right on top of the shoulder blade. Now the person who's the horse, try to move your arms. Not easy, is it? Now slide your thumbs towards the spine, off the shoulder blade. Now try to move your arms. Difference, isn't there? So, if you're the horse and you've got your saddle sitting like this, how are you going to move? You're going to move like this, right? So if I go to a barn and somebody says to me, oh, I'm having a horrible time, you can't get him to extend, and he knocks the pole all the time when he jumps, and, you know, I can't get him to move out, he's tight in his neck, shoulder restriction. All those things are shoulder restriction. And there's a lot of different ways a horse can be restricted in the shoulders. This is one of them, by placing your saddle too far forward. All right? Now, to show a difference, it's like I said, it's pretty obvious with a dressage saddle, but how can you tell with a jumping saddle? Now, this is a jumping tree. Points are the same. They're still straight. But what we don't have is the panel. Oh my God, the shoulder's gone. You can't see it at all because we have a forward cut to our flat. But again, when I put that tree in its panel, you still have that straight point. This whole area is flexible, all right? It has to be. There's no way I cannot not have anything on that shoulder blade when it's a jumping saddle, all right? If I wanted to make sure this horse had absolutely no restriction in jumping saddle by putting nothing out on the shoulder blade, that's how far back you have to put your saddle. But now, look how much saddle is off the last rib, all right? Can't have that. So placement has to do with your tree point. And here's the saddle with more clothes on it. So now that we have covering on it, there's two ways you can find it. One was the point pocket, the other is your hardware. All saddles have hardware in the front. That decorative head nail, you look for that. You lift up the skirt, you have a nameplate, you have a fall down D, and you have a saddle nail. That's the front edge of your tree point. If you guys want to come after the talk and see, you'll see there are holes in this tree point. That's where those pieces of hardware are. So you look for that hardware line, you make sure that line's behind the shoulder blade. All right? Now, you know how to find the tree in the front, but again, you need to know where your tree ends in the back. So where your skirt comes around the side of the tree and ends, if I lift this up, you can see that's just about where the tree ends in the saddle. So even if you have a saddle with a really big gusset on it, you look for where that ends, and that has to end at the last rib. If that skirt ends there, your saddle is too